Rowan Hale rode into camp like a man being chased by his own heart. Eliza Hart saw it in the way he pulled his horse so hard the animal slid in the dirt. She saw it in his face, too, rough with worry, tight with fear. He did not look like a man coming to make polite morning talk. He looked like a man about to change two lives at once. Eliza still had flour on her hands from helping with breakfast. Her uncle stepped out from behind the wagon. The whole camp seemed to hold its breath. Rowan swung down from the saddle, looked straight at her, and said her name like it mattered more than anything else in the world. What kind of man rides that hard unless he has finally decided to speak the truth he can no longer keep buried? 3 days earlier, Eliza had thought she was going to die. She had only meant to gather a few prairie flowers and breathe away the stiffness of travel. The wagon train had stopped for its noon meal, and everyone else stayed near the wagons, trading food and complaints and talk of California. Eliza wanted quiet. She wanted a few minutes away from rattling wheels and tired faces and dust that settled into everything. She had her sketch journal tucked beneath one arm and a pencil in her pocket. Back in St. Louis, little walks like that had always settled her mind. Out here on the open prairie, she had not yet learned how quickly peace could turn to danger. At first it was only a tremor beneath her boots. Then came the noise, deep and heavy, a rolling thunder that did not belong to the sky. Eliza turned and saw them, cattle, a whole wild mass of them. Horns, foam, eyes gone white with panic. They were rushing hard across the grass with no shape and no mercy, as if the land itself had broken loose. Her breath caught so sharply it hurt. She tried to run, but her foot struck a buried stone. The world tipped. Her journal flew from her hand. She hit the ground with enough force to drive the air from her chest. For one awful second she could not move. Dust rushed over her. Hooves hammered closer. She could smell the animals now, hot and foul and wild. She tried to push up, but her arms shook. Her skirt tangled around her legs. Fear hit her so hard it made her cold. She remembered thinking, not in words but in one sharp, terrible feeling, that this was how it ended. Not in California, not in some grand new life. Right there in crushed grass under a stranger's sky. Then a whistle cut through the noise. A horse came hard from the side. A rider bent low over its neck. He did not slow. He reached down at full speed, caught Eliza around the waist, and dragged her up with one fierce pull that sent pain through her ribs and shock through her mind. One moment she was on the ground. The next she was folded across a saddle against a hard chest, held there by an arm that felt like iron. The horse climbed fast toward higher stone. Eliza shut her eyes. Wind tore at her hair. The rider held her so close she could feel every pounding beat of his heart through his shirt. Behind them, the Stampede tore past with a sound like the end of the world. She did not know how long the ride lasted. It might have been seconds. It might have been forever. All she knew was that the thunder slowly faded and the horse finally stopped on a narrow rise of rock above the worst danger. The arm around her did not loosen at once. "You can breathe now," the man said. His voice was low and rough, not gentle exactly, but steady. Safe. Eliza opened her eyes and saw a face cut by weather and sun, a dark beard, a hard mouth, and the strangest gray eyes she had ever seen. They were storm-colored, sharp enough to unsettle her, calm enough to save her. He looked like a man built out of the same prairie stone beneath them. "You nearly got yourself killed," he said. The words should have stung, but they did not. They sounded too much like truth. "I know," she whispered. He slid from the saddle first, then reached up and lifted her down as if she weighed no more than a bed quilt. The second her boots touched rock, her knees failed. He caught her before she fell. One hand closed around her elbow, the other braced her shoulder. Eliza hated how much she trembled, hated even more that he noticed. "Fear comes after," he said. "That is normal." She looked up at him then fully, at the dust on his shirt, at the sweat darkening his collar, at the way concern lived beneath all that sternness. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life. Rowan Hale." He touched the brim of his hat when he said it, simple, direct, as if a name was enough. "Eliza Hart," she answered. He studied her for one quiet beat too long, and something passed through his face that she could not read. Then he looked toward the wagons in the distance and said they needed to get her back before the camp started a wider search. The ride back should have been awkward. It was not. It was worse. It was quiet. That quiet made her aware of everything. The strength of his arm around her waist, the leather creak of the saddle, the warmth of him at her back. She had known decent young men in St. Louis. Men with polished shoes, polite smiles, and hands too soft to tell any real story. None of them had ever made her feel the way this stranger did. Not merely flustered, not merely grateful, something deeper. A strange, breathless certainty that safety and danger had somehow arrived in the same pair of hands. Her uncle, Martin Hart, met them near the lead wagon half sick with worry. Eliza barely finished explaining before Rowan gave a short version of the truth and made light of his own part in it. Uncle Martin thanked him with the grave sincerity of a man who knew how close he had come to losing the last of his family. Rowan accepted it with a nod, but when he helped Eliza down from the horse, his hand stayed at her waist a heartbeat longer than they had to. "Take care, Miss Hart," he said. Then he rode away. That should have been the end of it. That night Eliza sat by the campfire with her journal open on her knees. She meant to sketch the flowers that had lured her off in the first place. Instead, her hand kept drawing the same face, the same hard jaw, the same shadowed brow, the same eyes that had looked at her as if he had seen not just a frightened woman on the prairie but something he was still trying to understand. Uncle Martin sat beside her after a while and glanced at the page before she could shut it. "That him, then?" he asked. Eliza snapped the book closed too fast. Heat climbed her cheeks. "I only wanted to remember the face of the man who saved me." Her uncle gave a small, tired smile. "Of course." They were meant to move on the next morning, but 3 days later, the wagon train rolled into a rough little Dakota town called Dry Creek for supplies. New lumber buildings lined the dusty road. Wagons crowded the street. Men came and went in boots filmed with mud and dirt. Everything looked unfinished, as if the town had been built in a hurry and was still waiting to see whether it would survive. Eliza went into the general store with the other women and found herself pausing over a bolt of blue cloth she could never justify buying. That was where she saw him again. Rowan stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, tall enough to seem out of place indoors. For a moment neither of them moved. The noise of the store faded. Eliza felt that same strange pull in her chest, stronger now because this time fear had not caused it. "Miss Hart," he said. "Mr. Hale. You are well, then?" "I am, though I keep listening for hooves." That earned the briefest flash of a smile. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, warmer, almost startled by his own amusement. They crossed the store slowly, speaking with care, as if something fragile had settled between them. Eliza learned he ran cattle north of town with his brothers. He learned she was still bound west with her uncle. And when she said California, that same shadow crossed his face again. Quick, controlled, impossible to miss. She should not have asked him to share coffee. A decent woman traveling with a wagon train had no business inviting a cowboy to sit with her in public unless she meant something by it. Eliza knew that. She did it anyway. He hesitated just long enough to make her think he would refuse. Then he said yes. They crossed to the small eating house on the main road and sat in a corner with coffee and fresh biscuits between them. There in that plain little room something in her life shifted. Rowan was not polished, he was not smooth, he did not talk to fill silence, but when he did speak every word felt earned. He told her about the ranch he was building with his brothers, not just cattle, not just land, a home, a future that could last. He spoke of hard work without complaint, of loneliness without self-pity, of wanting, one day, a woman who would see the life clearly and still choose it. Eliza listened too closely. Because somewhere under his plain words she heard the true thing. He was not only speaking of some future wife, he was speaking to her. When they stepped back out into the sun, Uncle Martin was waiting by the wagon. Eliza knew the moment was over. Rowan knew it too. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, steady and almost troubled like a man standing at the edge of a road he had not expected to find. She walked away then. She had to. But the next morning he came riding into camp like a man who had finally made up his mind. And now, standing there with dust still rising around his boots, Rowan looked from her uncle to her and said, I need to ask for something that may sound sudden, but I swear to you it is honest." Eliza felt her pulse pound in her throat, because before he spoke another word, she already knew California was slipping farther away. Rowan took off his hat and held it against his chest. That one small motion told Eliza how serious he was before he even began. Men did not bear themselves like that unless they meant to stand by what they said. "I know how this sounds," he said. "I know I have no right to ask much of anything. We barely know each other. But I have spent 3 nights trying to talk myself out of coming here, and I cannot do it, so I will speak plain." Uncle Martin folded his arms across his chest. The camp had gone quiet around them. Even the clatter of breakfast seemed farther off now. "Speak plain, then," Martin said. Rowan looked at Eliza first, not her uncle. That unsettled her more than anything else. He was not asking around her. He was asking through her. "I want to court you, Miss Hart," he said. "Properly. With your uncle's full permission. I want a chance to know you the right way before you go west and disappear from my life for good." The words landed with so much force that Eliza had to grip the edge of the wagon to steady herself. She had expected something bold. Not this. Not honesty stripped this bare. Uncle Martin stared at him. "You rode out here at sunrise to ask to court a woman you have known all of 3 days. Yes, sir. That is rash. Yes, sir." That answer almost made Eliza laugh, but no one there was breathing easily enough for laughter. Rowan went on before Martin could dismiss him. "I'm not asking for foolishness. I'm not asking you to hand her over to a stranger. There is a respectable boarding house in Dry Creek. Mrs. Bell runs it, widowed, church-going, stern as a fence post. Miss Hart could stay there while I call on her the proper way. Meals in public, visits in plain sight, no tricks, no fast talk. If she decides I am not what she wants, I will see her safely reunited with your train in California or anywhere else you name." That made Martin's face harden less, though only slightly. "You have thought this through." "I had to," Rowan said, "because if I did not come now, I would regret it for the rest of my life." Silence spread after that. Eliza could hear the flap of canvas in the breeze, a horse stamping, someone farther back in camp coughing into a sleeve. Small sounds, sharp sounds. The kind a person noticed when the whole shape of her future was starting to shift under her feet. Uncle Martin turned to her at last. "And what do you say to all this?" That was the question, was it not? Not what Rowan wanted, not what her uncle feared. What did she want? California had always been spoken of as the answer, a new beginning, a clean road after grief. Uncle Martin planned to open a store. She would keep his accounts, stand behind the counter, help build a solid life from ledgers and shelves and long hours. It was a decent future, a safe future. She had repeated that to herself for weeks until it sounded like belief. But standing there with Rowan Hale looking at her as if the truth mattered more than comfort, Eliza saw something she had not let herself name before. California was not her dream. It was the best plan available when no dream had belonged to her. She thought of St. Louis, of narrow rooms and polite sorrow after her father died, of being grateful and lonely at once in her uncle's house, of feeling useful on paper and hollow in the soul. She thought of the way her heart had come alive in a dusty eating house over coffee and plain talk. She thought of the ranch Rowan described, not as a grand place, but as a place still becoming. A place with room enough for work, purpose, and belonging. "I do not know if this is madness," she said quietly. Rowan's jaw tightened. "It may be, but it does not feel wrong," she finished. His shoulders eased by the smallest measure. Uncle Martin looked from one of them to the other. "Child, a thing can feel exciting and still ruin your life." "I know," Eliza said. She swallowed. "That is what frightens me, not that I feel nothing, that I feel too much." Martin's eyes softened then, though worry still lived in them. "If you stay, you give up a certain road for an uncertain one. Was California certain?" she asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The answer was no. They were heading into a hard country, across plains and mountains and desert, toward a city she had never seen and a future no one could promise. The only certainty was movement. Rowan did not interrupt. He did not press. That silence of his gave her room to hear herself think. "I want to stay," Eliza said. Once she spoke the words, there was no calling them back. I want to know whether what I feel is foolishness or truth. And I think I would rather find out here than spend years wondering what would have happened if I had not been brave for once in my life." Rowan shut his eyes for one brief second as if relief had struck him low and hard. When he opened them again, they were bright in a way that unsettled her more than any smile could have. Uncle Martin dragged a hand down his face. "Your mother did this too," he said. "Not this exactly, but she chose with her heart when everyone told her to choose with caution." "Was she sorry?" Eliza asked. "No, not once." That seemed to pain him and comfort him both. "Then I will take after her in this," Eliza said. Martin studied her for so long she thought he might still refuse. Then he turned to Rowan. "If I agree, I do so because my niece is no child and because I know that trying to force her west would break something in her I have no right to break. But hear me well. If you dishonor her, neglect her, or make sport of her trust, I will not forget it." "You have my word," Rowan said. "I will honor her in all ways." Uncle Martin nodded once. "That will have to do." Everything moved quickly after that. Too quickly for thought to keep pace. The train delayed its departure until midday. Mrs. Bell was sent for and arrived in a wagon with a face that suggested she did not waste kindness on nonsense. Yet after one long measuring look at Eliza, she agreed to take her in. Word spread through the camp with the speed of sparks in dry grass. Women came to hug her or whisper warnings or ask questions she could not answer. A few looked scandalized, more looked wistful. Eliza packed her trunk with unsteady hands, her dresses, her journal, the little box of letters from her parents, a comb, sewing things, 2 books. More than once she had to stop and stand still because the act of folding her own life into a traveling chest suddenly felt enormous. Uncle Martin found her fastening the straps and closed the wagon flap behind him. "You can still come with me," he said. "I know. No shame in changing your mind. I know that too." He leaned against the wheel and looked older than he had a week ago. "When your father died, I promised your mother in my heart that I would see you safe. I thought safe meant keeping you close to a known road. Maybe I was wrong. You kept your promise," she said. "You got me this far." His mouth twisted with feeling. "I would have taken you all the way. I know you would." For a moment neither spoke. Then Eliza stepped forward and put her arms around him. He held her hard enough to hurt, and she was grateful for it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for taking me in, for giving me work, for never making me feel alone even when I was." He drew back and brushed a hand over her hair the way he had when she was little. "Write to me. Every chance you get. I will. And if this goes badly, if he proves false, if the life is not what you hoped, you send word. I do not care if I am in California or the moon. I will come." That pulled a shaky laugh from her. "The moon seems far. Not too far." By the time she walked back out, Rowan had loaded her trunk into his wagon. He stood beside it, not touching anything else, not taking liberties now that the choice had gone in his favor. That restraint touched her more than some grand speech might have. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Then we will begin there." The wagon train pulled out under a white noon sky. Wheels groaned. Oxen leaned into their harness. Dust rose in slow curtains. Eliza stood between her uncle and Rowan and watched the line stretch longer and longer across the prairie. She saw Uncle Martin turn back twice to wave. She waved both times until the train became no more than moving specks, then only dust, then nothing. Only then did the true weight of what she had done settle over her. She had stepped off one life without any proof the next would hold, having second thoughts. Rowan asked. She turned to him. He did not look smug. He looked almost as shaken as she felt. "Terrified thoughts," she said, "not second thoughts." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I can work with terrified." That afternoon he took her to Mrs. Bell's boarding house, a neat 2-story place with white curtains and a garden fighting bravely against the dry ground. Mrs. Bell showed Eliza a small front room with morning light, a narrow bed, a washstand, and a quilt pieced from faded prints. It was not grand. It felt safe. "We keep proper hours here," Mrs. Bell said. "Meals in the dining room. Visitors only in the parlor or on the porch. No foolish conduct under my roof." "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said. Mrs. Bell gave Rowan a harder stare. "I mean you especially. "Yes, ma'am," he said. That nearly made Eliza smile again. When the trunk was carried upstairs and the rules made clear, Rowan waited with her on the porch steps while Mrs. Bell went inside. The town lay quiet in the late light. Somewhere a hammer rang. A dog barked twice and stopped. Beyond the last buildings, the prairie opened wide in gold. "I will not rush you," Rowan said. "I know I came to camp in a storm of my own making, but I will not press you into something before your heart is ready. I only wanted the chance to stand where I could be seen clearly." "You have been seen clearly from the start," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes moved to hers then, slow and searching. "And what do you see?" "A man who frightens me a little," she admitted, "because he makes me want things I had not planned to want." He took that in without smiling. "That is fair. You frighten me some too, me. Yes, because I have spent years learning how to build a ranch and no time at all learning what to do with hope." That left her quiet. He stood then and settled his hat back on his head. "I will call tomorrow, Miss Hart, if you are willing." "I am willing," she said softly. He nodded once. "Then tomorrow." Eliza watched him walk down the path and out to the street. He did not look back at once. When he finally did, it was only for a second. But that second was enough to leave her heart unsteady all through supper and deep into the night. Long after the house had gone still, she lay awake in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar floorboards settle. Everything in her life had changed in a single day. She had no map for this new road, no promise it would end well. Only a quiet room, a beating heart, and the memory of a cowboy who had asked not for her hand, not yet, but for the chance to earn it. For the first time in a long while, fear and hope felt almost the same. The next morning, Eliza woke before sunrise and forgot where she was. For one soft, disoriented moment, she expected to hear wagon wheels creaking and campfires being stirred back to life. Instead, she heard the quiet sounds of a still house, a board settling, a kettle lid shifting somewhere below, the distant cry of a bird out beyond town. Then memory returned all at once. Dry Creek, Mrs. Bell's boarding house, Rowan Hale, the choice she had made with her whole future balanced on one uncertain feeling. Her stomach tightened, though whether from fear or anticipation she could not tell. She dressed with more care than usual and went downstairs to help Mrs. Bell with breakfast, partly from habit and partly because idleness made her thoughts too loud. Mrs. Bell put her to work slicing apples and setting plates, and for that Eliza was grateful. The older woman asked no foolish questions. She only watched with those sharp widow's eyes that missed very little. "He will come today," Mrs. Bell said at last while rolling biscuit dough. "Yes, ma'am. You seem surprised." "I am not surprised," Eliza said, "only aware of it." Mrs. Bell nodded as if that answer was good enough. "Mr. Hale has a serious face, but he has always been a serious man. That counts for something out here. Talk is cheap. Steady is not." Eliza held on to those words through the morning. Rowan arrived just after noon, clean shirt, brushed hat, boots still dusty because no amount of care could defeat Dakota roads. He stood in the doorway of the boarding house parlor looking almost too large for the room, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Mrs. Bell kept her sewing in her lap and did not pretend not to study him. "Miss Hart," Rowan said. "Mr. Hale." He glanced toward the bundle in his hand and seemed almost awkward for the first time since she had met him. "I brought you something. It is not much." He passed it to her. Inside were wild prairie flowers, freshly cut, their stems tied with plain twine. Eliza looked up too fast. "You rode out to find these." "There are not many near town," he said. "The good patches are farther off." Mrs. Bell made a sound that might have been approval or might have been warning. It was hard to tell with her. They sat in the parlor under her watchful eye and talked first of easy things. The town, the boarding house meals, the weather. But easy talk would never have been enough for either of them. Rowan did not know how to float on the surface of a thing for long. Before the hour was over, he was asking about her parents, and Eliza found herself telling him more than she had expected to. Her mother had painted whenever she could steal time from ordinary life. Her father had kept a small bookshop that smelled of dust and leather and old paper. He had loved ideas more than profit, which was one reason the shop had never made much money. Yet to Eliza it had been the richest place in the world. She told Rowan about standing on a stool behind the counter as a girl, dusting shelves and reading pages she was too young to understand. She told him how fever took her father in less than a week, how silence settled over the house after that and never truly left until she joined her uncle's journey west. Rowan listened the way he did everything else, fully, without reaching to fill her pauses. When she finished, he said only, "That is too much loss for one heart." The simplicity of it undid her more than sympathy ever had. He was not trying to improve grief. He was only making room for it. "And you?" she asked quietly. He leaned back in the chair and rested his forearms on his knees. "Our parents died within 4 days of each other when I was 19. Cholera. Jacob was old enough to help me hold things together. Samuel was still half a boy. After that there was land to keep, debts to manage, cattle to save, and not much time for mourning. You get up, you work, then you get up again. That is how some families survive. You raised your brother then. We all raised each other," he said. "But Samuel had more growing left to do than the rest of us." That told her more about him than a long speech might have. Duty did not sit on him like a burden. It sat like bone, a part of what made him. Mrs. Bell declared at last that enough parlor air could make fools of anyone and sent them to the porch where they could speak under open sky. Eliza suspected the old woman trusted open daylight more than walls. Rowan seemed to understand that too. He offered his arm with a grave courtesy that made her smile, and they stepped outside. The porch faced west. Dry grass bent at the edge of town. Beyond it the prairie rolled on under a clear, bright afternoon. They sat on the bench near the steps, not touching, though she could feel his nearness with ridiculous clarity. "I should tell you something plain," Rowan said after a while. "I have not done this before." She turned to him, courted a woman, wanted one enough to risk looking foolish. The warmth that rose in her cheeks annoyed her. Why should that make her blush like a schoolgirl? Yet it did. "Perhaps it is well," she said. "I have not done this before either." That surprised him. Truly surprised him. "You were never courted back in St. Louis." "Courted, yes. Moved by it, no. There is a difference." That eased something in his face. "And am I moving you, Eliza Hart?" She ought to have answered with wit, with restraint, with a turn aside. Instead she found herself meeting those gray eyes and speaking the truth. "More than I find comfortable." His mouth shifted into the smallest smile. "I am glad of that, though I suppose I should not be." She laughed then, and the sound startled both of them. It felt strange and good to laugh so easily. Rowan watched her as if that sound itself was something worth keeping. He called again the next day and the next, never in haste, never in secret. Sometimes they walked along the creek outside town where willow branches dragged the water. Sometimes they shared supper at the eating house. Sometimes they sat on Mrs. Bell's porch while the evening light turned the world gold. He brought her no expensive gifts because he had none to give, but he brought usefulness and attention. A smooth stone from the creek he thought she might like to sketch. A pair of riding gloves bought second-hand but cleaned well because he had noticed the sun reddening her hands. Once he brought her a small wooden case he had carved himself for her pencils. "You made this?" she asked, turning it over in wonder. He shrugged, though she could see he cared about her answer. "Winter evenings leave a man with only so many things to do once chores are done. It is beautiful. It is simple. Simple things can still be beautiful," she said. He looked at her with such steady warmth after that she had to lower her eyes to the box in her lap. As the days passed, Eliza learned the shape of his quiet. He spoke little in crowds, but alone with her he was careful rather than closed. He told her he liked dawn best because a man could still believe in the day before it tested him. He admitted he sang badly but liked hymns anyway. He confessed that he had been praying for years for a home that felt fuller than 3 brothers eating in silence after dark, not because he wanted comfort alone, because work without love began to feel like building walls with no door in them. "And when did you begin to think I had something to do with that prayer?" she asked one evening by the creek. He skimmed a flat stone across the water before answering. "The day I pulled you onto my horse, I felt something I had no business feeling for a stranger. The second time I saw you, it grew worse instead of better. By the third night I realized I could either ride into your camp and speak, or spend the rest of my life pretending I had not recognized something meant for me. Eliza went very still. Meant for you. He looked ashamed then, as if he feared he had said too much. I know how that sounds. I do not mean I thought God handed me a woman like a reward. I mean I believed he put someone in my path who might understand the life I was trying to build. Someone I was meant to cherish if she chose me back. That changed everything. Not the force of his feeling, but its shape. He was not claiming her. He was honoring the freedom in her choice. I am glad you rode into camp, she said softly. Rowan let out a breath that might have been relief. So am I. Near the end of the second week, he asked if she would like to see the ranch. He asked it carefully, as if aware the question held more weight than a simple outing. I want you to know what my life truly is, he said. Not just how I speak of it in town. If you are to judge me fairly, you should judge what I have built. Eliza knew at once that she wanted to go. She also knew the day would matter more than she was ready to admit. Mrs. Bell approved only after Jacob Hale rode in to escort them as far as the ranch lane, and after Rowan agreed to have them back before dusk. Samuel was sent to meet them at the gate, so the whole thing might satisfy every demand of propriety. Eliza suspected the Hale brothers had faced harder negotiations with cattle buyers. The morning of the ride came bright and wind-washed. Rowan brought a gentle bay mare borrowed from a neighbor and helped Eliza mount with hands that were careful to the point of reverence. Once they were on the open trail, the town fell behind them quickly. Grass moved in long silver-green waves. Meadowlarks rose out of brush. Far off, cattle darkened the land like scattered ink. It was beautiful in a harder way than the city had ever been beautiful. Nothing here begged to be admired. It simply was. You look different out here, Eliza said. How so? Like you belong to yourself. He glanced at her and then ahead again. Maybe I do. After nearly 2 hours, they crested a low rise and the ranch spread before them. A stout house of logs and stone sat near water. A barn and shed stood in good order. Fences ran true. Cattle grazed over wide pasture. It was not grand, it was real enough to make her chest tight. This is it, Rowan said quietly. What I have to offer is not polished, but it is honest. Eliza looked at the house, the land, the men working in the distance, and then at him. Honest was beginning to seem more dangerous than any polished dream she had ever been sold. Samuel Hale reached them first. Easy smile, long legs, hat tipped back as if rules sat lighter on him than on most men. He took Eliza's hand with cheerful respect and said he was glad at last to meet the woman who had turned his brother into a man who suddenly found reasons to go to town every day. Rowan gave him a look. Samuel only grinned wider. A few minutes later, Jacob came from the barn, older than Rowan, broader through the shoulders, with a face that looked carved for steadiness rather than charm. If Samuel carried warmth out in the open, Jacob kept his tucked clothes. Yet his greeting was kind, and when he welcomed Eliza to the ranch, she believed he meant it. They showed her everything, not as a performance, not as if they were trying to dazzle her. That honesty struck her more deeply than any grand gesture would have. Jacob explained the water system and the fences they had rebuilt after spring washouts. Samuel pointed out the mare that kicked at anyone but him. Rowan said less than either brother, but whenever she paused to look at something, he watched her face as if her understanding mattered more than her approval. She saw hard work everywhere. Harnesses cleaned and repaired, tools hung where tools belonged, a smokehouse built with care, a vegetable patch not large enough yet but hopeful. The house itself stood plain and sturdy with a broad table in the main room and windows that begged for curtains. Life lived there. Men ate there, slept there, planned there, endured there. It needs a woman's hand, Eliza said before she could stop herself. Jacob's mouth twitched. We have noticed. Samuel laughed outright. Rowan looked at the ground. Heat rose into Eliza's cheeks, but she did not take the words back. They were true. Place was strong but incomplete, not empty, not barren, simply unfinished in the way a sentence is unfinished when the final word has not yet been spoken. After dinner, Rowan led her up a low hill beyond the house where the hole spread open beneath them. Prairie rolled wide under the afternoon sun. Cattle moved slow in the distance. Wind stirred the grass around their boots. "This is the place I kept trying to describe," he said. "I reckon I did a poor job of it." "You did not," Eliza answered. "I simply could not imagine it well enough from town, and now—" She took her time, not to tease him because the truth deserved care. "Now I see how much of you is in it. Every board, every fence, every choice. You did not build this to look impressive. You built it to last." That seemed to reach him somewhere deep. His face changed, softened, then tightened again as if he did not trust himself with too much feeling at once. "That is all I ever wanted," he said. "Something lasting, something fit to hand down." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Wind moved between them. A hawk circled high above. It would have been easy to pretend they were only discussing land and cattle. It would also have been false. "Tell me what you see," Rowan said quietly. Eliza looked again, but not only with her eyes. She saw the patch of ground behind the house where beans and squash could grow better if fenced proper. She saw flower boxes beneath the windows. She saw children running from yard to barn and back again with scraped knees and loud voices. She saw winter evenings with lamplight warming the glass. She saw books on a shelf, mended shirts drying near the stove, accounts kept straight, supper waiting for tired men, work shared, burdens shared, joy shared. "I see a home," she said. His breath left him slowly. "That is what I have been praying someone else would see." When they returned to town that evening, Rowan helped her down from the mare and let his hands rest at her waist just one beat longer than courtesy required. The touch was not bold. It was careful, yet it made her pulse flutter all the same. "I am glad I showed you," he said. "So am I." He looked as if he wanted to say more, but Mrs. Bell had opened the door behind them, and propriety stepped between them like another person. Rowan tipped his hat and left. Eliza went inside with the wind of that day still moving through her. The weeks after that settled into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely natural. Rowan called in the evenings when work allowed. He took her to church on Sundays. He walked with her by the creek. Sometimes they said very little. Sometimes they talked until shadows grew long and Mrs. Bell had to clear her throat from the porch to remind them time still existed. Eliza found work of her own in Dry Creek. She began helping Mrs. Bell with accounts after learning the widow kept numbers in 3 separate notebooks and trusted none of them. She offered to teach letters and sums to a handful of children whose parents wanted more for them than rough chance and hard labor. She sketched in the mornings when the light was kind. She had not expected that staying behind would give her more purpose so quickly, yet it did. Not all of that purpose came from Rowan. That mattered to her. She was not disappearing into a man's life. She was stepping into her own with him walking beside it. One evening by the creek she told him that. "I did not stay only for you," she said. "I know," Rowan replied. The answer surprised her. "You do." He bent to pick up a stone and rolled it in his palm. "I hoped you stayed partly for me. But if you had stayed only because a man asked, I would have worried. I do not want a woman who vanishes inside my name. I want one who stands in it beside me." That made her throat tighten. "You say things like that," she murmured, "and make it hard to think straight." A rare half-smile touched his mouth. Thinking straight is overrated. By late summer, the town had begun to look at them as a pair, though no vows had yet been spoken. People nodded when Rowan walked beside her. Women smiled in ways that mixed approval with curiosity. Men treated him with the dry patience reserved for someone clearly caught by a woman and not sorry for it. Eliza felt all of that without fully trusting it. Happiness still frightened her a little, not because she disliked it, because she now had something she could lose. That truth sharpened the evening Jacob rode into town alone and asked if the 3 of them could speak at the restaurant. Rowan knew something was coming the moment he saw his brother's face. Jacob did not waste good boots on unnecessary trips. They took a back table. Coffee was poured. Jacob waited until the waitress walked away, then folded his hands and spoke with plain purpose. "I am getting married." Samuel, who had come in behind him at the last moment and stolen a biscuit off Rowan's plate, nearly choked laughing at Rowan's expression. "You are what?" Rowan asked. "Marrying Mary Sutton," Jacob said. "We have been writing since spring. She is coming from Denver in 3 weeks. Eliza knew Mary only a little from church socials. Sensible, warm eyes, strong hands. The kind of woman who looked like she could do hard things without announcing it. That is wonderful, Eliza said. It is, Jacob replied. But it changes things. He looked at Rowan then, and no one at the table missed his meaning. Once Mary is at the ranch, the house arrangement will have to change. Samuel has already agreed to move into the south bunk shed once I fix the roof. You will need to do the same or build something of your own. Samuel took another bite of biscuit and said, which any man might do if he happened to be head over heels and too stubborn to admit time is moving whether he does or not. Rowan shot him a flat stare. You enjoy danger too much. Only family danger, Samuel said. Eliza lowered her eyes to hide a smile, but her heart had already begun to pound. Jacob turned to her with more care. Miss Hart, forgive my bluntness. I mean no disrespect. But my brother has spent months looking at you like a man who has already chosen the rest of his life and is only waiting for courage to catch up with him. A hot flush swept through Rowan's face. That is enough. No, Jacob said, it is not. You asked that woman for the right to court her before most men would have learned her favorite color. Do not tell me now that patience has become your guiding virtue. The silence after that felt almost alive. Rowan set his coffee down slowly. His hands were steady. His voice was not. Would you both give us a moment? Jacob rose at once. Samuel followed, but not before murmuring to Eliza, he has been practicing speeches in his head for weeks. I can tell. He looks pained in a special way. Rowan muttered his brother's name in warning. Samuel only grinned and left. Then Eliza and Rowan were alone at the table, with coffee cooling between them and the whole room seeming to blur around the edges. I am sorry, Rowan said. I did not ask for that circus. I know. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. Jacob is not wrong about one thing. Which thing? About me having chosen. Her breath caught. I have tried to be patient because you deserved patience, he said. I have tried not to crowd what is precious. But every day since I rode into your uncle's camp, I have known I would either build my life with you or carry the ache of not doing so until I am old. I did not want to speak too soon and make it cheap. Yet silence is starting to feel cheap too. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat. Loud, unsteady, very young. Rowan, she said softly, I love you. There it was, not dressed up, not smoothed into some careful phrase, just truth standing between them with nowhere to hide. The world seemed to go still around those 3 words. Eliza felt as though something inside her had been waiting a long time to hear them spoken aloud, even if she had not known it. She had loved him too, though she had been naming it in smaller ways, in the steadiness of him, in the room he made for her thoughts, in the way he looked at her as if her mind and courage mattered as much as her face, in the life he wanted not to place upon her but to share. I love you too, she whispered. The change in him was almost painful to witness. Relief, wonder, gratitude. Joy so sharp it looked like fear for one passing second. You do. She laughed softly through the sting behind her eyes. Yes, Rowan, I do. He closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like a prayer answered halfway. Then I need to ask you something soon, he said. Not here. Not like this, but soon. Her heart turned over at the certainty in his voice. She knew what he meant. Knew also that her answer had already begun forming long before he would ask. Outside, evening light lay warm across the street. Inside, the coffee had gone untouched. And for the first time since stepping off the wagon train, Eliza no longer felt as though she were standing between 2 possible lives. She was standing at the edge of one life that was finally beginning to claim her whole heart. Rowan did not make her wait long. 2 evenings later, he came to Mrs. Bell's porch with a seriousness about him that made Eliza's breath catch the moment she saw his face. He greeted Mrs. Bell. He greeted Eliza. He sat down beside her on the top step and rested his hat on one knee, turning it slowly in his hands as if steadying himself by touch. I would like to take you somewhere tomorrow, he said, if Mrs. Bell allows it. Mrs. Bell, who was shelling peas in a bowl beside the door, said, I have not chained the girl to my porch, though perhaps I ought to. Eliza smiled. Where are you taking me? To the creek, Rowan said, the spot where we have been before. I have something to ask you there, and I would rather ask it where the sky is wide enough to hold the answer. Mrs. Bell's peas clicked into the bowl. That is a suspiciously marriage-shaped sentence if ever I heard one. Rowan went red to the ears. Eliza could not help it. She laughed. "Tomorrow, then," she said. "Tomorrow." That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face across the restaurant table when she had whispered that she loved him too. Her heart had not settled since. It beat now with a mixture of joy and dread, because love was one thing. A life joined to another was something even larger. Love could bloom in quiet moments. Marriage had to stand through drought, sickness, bills, storms, and grief. It had to survive mornings when no one felt poetic. It had to endure the plain, hard days. By dawn, Eliza knew one thing clearly. Those thoughts did not frighten her away from Rowan. They only made her want him more honestly. He arrived in the afternoon with the bay mare for her and his own dark gelding beneath him. Mrs. Bell adjusted Eliza's collar like a general preparing a soldier for battle, then warned Rowan to bring her back with the same honor in which he had taken her out. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You say that to me often, because you require it often." Mrs. Bell almost smiled. Almost. They rode in companionable quiet beyond the edge of town where the grass ran tall and the sky seemed endless. Late summer had touched everything with a mellow gold. The prairie did not look soft exactly. It never did. But it held a kind of grave beauty that had rooted itself in Eliza's heart. This land no longer felt like a harsh stop along the way to somewhere else. It felt like its own answer. They reached the creek near sunset. Rowan tied the horses in shade and led her to the bank where willow branches trailed over slow water. They had sat there before, talked there, laughed there. Yet that evening the air itself felt different, more careful, more awake. For a little while Rowan said nothing. He stood beside her looking out across the water, jaw tight, shoulders still. Eliza knew then that whatever speech Samuel had mocked him for practicing, he had not found it any easier now. "You can say it plain," she murmured. He glanced at her. "That obvious? Only to me." That seemed to steady him. He drew in a breath and faced her fully. "When I was younger, I thought a man built a life with his hands and that was enough. Land, cattle, a roof that did not leak, food put by for winter. I thought if I did those things well, I would have done all I needed to do. Then years passed and the ranch grew, and I found myself standing in the middle of all I had worked for with no one to share the shape of it. No one who knew what it cost. No one who saw more than hard ground and harder weather." His voice roughened, not from weakness, from feeling held too long. "Then I found you, first under the worst kind of circumstances, then in town, then on that porch, at the creek, in every talk since. And I learned that all my praying had not been for land or luck or money. It had been for a partner, though I did not have the wisdom to name it properly." Eliza felt tears press hot behind her eyes. She did not speak. She did not want to break the thread of what he was finally brave enough to say. Rowan took one step closer. "I love that you are strong enough to choose and kind enough to care. I love that you see beauty where other people only see labor. I love the way you think, the way you listen, the way you make a room feel less empty by being in it. And I love that you did not stay here because I asked. You stayed because your own heart had something to say." He reached into his pocket then. Eliza's breath caught when he drew out a narrow gold band, simple and worn smooth with age. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "I had Jacob hold it for years because I was afraid to keep hoping I might have use for it one day. I was wrong about many things. I was wrong about that too." Then with no flourish and no performance, Rowan Hale went down on one knee in the prairie grass. "Eliza Hart, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me out here, hard as it can be sometimes? Will you be my partner in all things, my wife, the keeper of my heart, the woman I thank God for when I wake and when I sleep?" The world blurred. She had imagined this moment more than once. In every imagining she had pictured herself calm enough to answer with dignity. Instead, tears spilled over before she could stop them, and she laughed at the same time because joy had hit her too hard to behave itself. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Rowan, I will." He rose at once, his own face shaken open with such pure relief it nearly undid her again. His hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been waiting for her. For one heartbeat they only stared at each other. Then he pulled her into his arms. He held her fiercely like a man who had nearly lost something and could not yet believe he had not. Eliza wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder. She could feel the pounding of his heart. It answered her own. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for saying yes. You make it sound like I have done you a favor." "You have," he said, "the greatest one of my life." She drew back enough to look at him. "And what if I think you have done the same for me? Then I reckon we are even." She laughed again, softer this time. He kissed her then, and though he had kissed her knuckles once and touched his forehead to hers more times than she could count, this was their first true kiss. It was not wild. It was not hurried. It was deep and careful and full of wonder, as if both of them understood that some doors only opened once and ought to be entered with reverence. When they broke apart, Rowan pressed his forehead to hers, his private gesture, the one that always felt like a promise. "We should tell Mrs. Bell before she sends a posse," he said. "That seems wise. She will pretend not to be pleased. She will fail." They rode back through falling light with the prairie turning blue at the edges. Eliza kept looking down at the ring on her finger as if it might vanish if she looked away too long. At the boarding house porch, Mrs. Bell took one glance at her face, then at Rowan, then at the ring. "Well," she said, "about time you knew." Eliza asked, "Child, I have been a widow for 14 years, not blind." Mrs. Bell kissed Eliza's cheek, shook Rowan's hand like she was sealing a legal matter, and then announced that supper would be special on account of proper engagements being rarer than foolish ones. Word spread quickly through Dry Creek. Jacob rode in the next morning and clasped Rowan by the shoulder with quiet pride. Samuel whooped so loudly outside the eating house that 2 horses shied in the street. Mary Sutton, now nearly ready to marry Jacob herself, hugged Eliza and told her she had just improved the Hale family beyond anything nature had managed on its own. The weddings were set only 3 weeks apart. Jacob and Mary would marry first, then Rowan and Eliza once the parson returned from a church circuit farther north. Eliza thought the wait might torment her. Instead it passed in a rush of sewing, planning, and small treasured moments. Mrs. Bell helped alter a cream muslin dress for her. Mary stitched lace at the collar. Rowan came by nearly every evening, and though propriety still held them at arm's length in public, the quiet between them had changed. It was no longer uncertainty, it was belonging. One evening, as they sat on the porch beneath a sky full of stars, Rowan took her hand and laid it against his chest. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "Your heart?" "Yes. It is beating very hard for a man sitting still." "That is because I still cannot believe you said yes." She smiled in the dark. "Best get used to believing it. I mean to keep saying yes for a very long time." His fingers tightened around hers. "Good, because I mean to spend that long earning it." The wedding itself came on a clear September morning. The church was small, whitewashed, plain. The kind of place built by people who valued usefulness over display. Yet when Eliza stepped inside on Uncle Martin's arm, it looked beautiful to her. He had made the journey back from farther west after receiving her letter. He looked travel-worn and emotional and deeply determined not to show too much of either. When he placed her hand in Rowan's at the front of the church, his eyes shone despite all effort to the contrary. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "With my life," Rowan answered. Eliza looked up then and saw that Rowan's stern face had gone almost tender with feeling. That look alone might have carried her through the whole day. The vows were simple, the ring warm from his hand, the kiss soft at first, then surer when the parson's smile gave him courage. And when it was done, when she turned and saw the faces looking back at them, Eliza felt something settle deep inside her. Not excitement, not relief, something steadier. Home, there was food after, and music, and laughter, and more good wishes than she could count. Samuel danced badly on purpose. Mrs. Bell cried in secret and then denied it. Uncle Martin sat with Jacob and spoke about business as if practical matters were his only shield against tenderness. Mary hugged Eliza twice and warned her that Hale men loved hard but sometimes needed plain speech to find their sense. By dusk Rowan leaned close and asked the question that made her heart shiver. "Ready to go home, wife?" "Yes," she whispered. "I am ready." He took her out to the ranch on horseback just as he had first carried her from danger, only now there was no fear in the ride. His arms circled her. Her back rested against his chest. The sky above them blazed orange, then crimson, then softened toward violet. Ahead, lamplight shone from the ranch house windows. When he lifted her down at the porch, he did not let go. He looked at her for one long quiet second, then swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold. Eliza laughed, burying her face against his shoulder as the door swung shut behind them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hale," he said. The house had been set in order with more care than usual. Fresh bread waited beneath a cloth. A lamp burned low. Flowers stood in a jar on the table. Yet the room seemed to fade when Rowan cupped her face in both hands and kissed her again. This kiss was deeper. Hungrier, but tenderness still lived inside it. So did a question. Eliza answered by drawing him closer. "I have never," she began when they finally broke apart. "Neither have I," Rowan said gently. "We will learn it together." That eased the last of her fear. He took her hand and led her toward the bedroom where moonlight lay silver across the quilts. Everything after that was new and awkward and tender and sweet in the way true first times often are. There was shyness. There was laughter. There were whispered reassurances and pauses and wonder. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt taken. It felt chosen, moment by both of them. Later, when the room had gone quiet and she lay tucked against his side with his arm around her, Eliza listened to his breathing and let happiness settle through her body like warmth after long cold. "Are you happy?" he asked into the darkness. "More than I knew a person could be," she said. He kissed her hair. "So am I, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, since losing her father, since stepping onto the wagon trail toward a future that never truly belonged to her." Eliza felt no split inside herself at all. Only peace. Marriage did not soften the land. The first hard frost came only 3 weeks after the wedding. By the second month, Eliza understood that love could make a house warmer, but it could not shorten winter or still the wind. Snow drove across the prairie in long white sheets. Ice gathered along the inside edges of the window glass. The men came in after dark with their collars stiff from cold and their hands red from work, and every evening seemed to ask the same question of everyone under that roof. Would they bend, or would they hold? Eliza held. She learned the stove first. It had its own moods and did not care whether she was tired or new to the work. She learned how long bread needed in that heat, how quickly coffee could turn bitter, how to keep soup thick enough to fill a man after 12 hours outside. She mended shirts, counted supplies, took over the ranch books in a way that made Jacob stare and Rowan laugh under his breath. "I knew those numbers were running loose," Rowan said one evening while she sat with ledgers open on the table. "Running loose is a polite way to describe it," she replied. Jacob looked over her shoulder. "Are you telling me we have been guessing at feed costs for months?" "Years," Rowan said. Jacob muttered something low and admiring. Eliza hid a smile and kept writing. She brought her own order into the place, but not only order. By Christmas there were curtains in the windows, a proper shelf for books, dried herbs hanging near the stove, a rug beside the bed. A little box garden started in tin pots on the sill because she refused to spend a whole winter without one green growing thing in sight. The ranch did not become softer, it became fuller, more itself. And Rowan changed too, though perhaps only she noticed how much. He had always been steady. Now he smiled more easily. He came through the door at day's end looking for her before he looked for food. Sometimes he would stop behind her while she worked and rest one rough hand at her waist for no reason beyond needing contact. At night, after the house had gone quiet, he told her things he had carried alone for years. Not only worries about cattle and weather. Fears, hopes, the strange guilt he still carried over raising Samuel too hard after their parents died. The terror he had felt the day he rode into her uncle's camp, thinking he might lose her before he had ever truly had the chance to know her. "You look so certain," Eliza said once, lying with her head on his chest. "I was not certain," he answered. "I was desperate." She tilted her face up to him. "There is honesty for you." He brushed a thumb along her cheek. "I never promised charm. No, only truth." Spring came late and muddy, but it came. Snow sank into the earth. Water ran in the creek again. Calves were born. The prairie lifted its head from winter and began to breathe. Eliza rode out with Rowan whenever the work allowed, more confident in the saddle now, skirts pinned up, hair tied back, pencil case in her saddlebags. She sketched fences, clouds, cattle, the line of Rowan's shoulders when he sat a horse. He caught her at it more than once. "You planning to make me handsome on that page?" he asked. "I do not work miracles," she said. That earned the laugh she loved most. The quiet one. The one that sounded surprised to exist. Mary came fully into the family after her marriage to Jacob, and Eliza thanked heaven for another woman near at hand. Mary was practical where Eliza was thoughtful, quick where Eliza was patient. Together, they made the place feel less like three men's hard-won outpost and more like the beginning of a true family holding. Samuel hovered in and out of both houses, cheerful and lanky, and still only half convinced that regular meals and curtains had not improved his life beyond reason. By summer, the ranch no longer felt like Rowan's dream that Eliza had joined. It felt like theirs. One warm evening they stood behind the house where young bean vines were climbing the supports Rowan had built for her. Eliza took his hand and pressed it low against her belly. He looked at her first with confusion, then with dawning hope so sharp it nearly made him afraid to trust it. "Eliza," she nodded, tears already in her eyes. "Yes." For one long second he did not move. Then he gathered her into his arms so carefully it felt like worship. He held her as though both she and the child were already the most precious things he had ever been asked to guard. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby," she said. His face when he pulled back was not polished joy. It was bigger than that. Awe, gratitude, fear, love. A man humbled by being given more than he had dared ask for. That night he knelt by the bed before climbing in beside her, not from habit, not from show. He bowed his head and thanked God in a voice rough enough to break her heart. Not for prosperity, not for sons or daughters yet unborn, for her, for the chance to love what had once only been lonely prayer. Their first child, a boy they named Thomas Martin Hale after Uncle Martin, came with the first cold edge of November and enough labor to teach both of them how thin the line could be between fear and joy. Rowan nearly wore a path in the floor outside the bedroom, while Mary and the midwife stayed with Eliza through the worst of it. When the baby's cry finally rose into the dark, Rowan went still as stone before rushing in at last. Eliza never forgot his face when he saw their son. As if the world had opened wider than he knew it could. He took the baby with shaking hands. Thomas was red, loud, furious at being born and perfect. Rowan looked from the child to Eliza and back again as if he could not decide which miracle to thank first. "You made me a father," he said softly. "We made him together," she answered, smiling through her exhaustion. "Yes," Rowan said, "but you carried the harder half." The years after that did not pass in a blur to Eliza. They passed in seasons, in work, in small things that built a life more surely than grand ones ever could. A daughter next, named Rose after Eliza's mother, with dark hair and Rowan's storm-gray eyes. Then another child years later, a quiet boy called Luke who followed his older brother through every barn and pasture as if trying to step into the very shape of him. There were losses too. A baby they never got to hold long enough. A fever that nearly took Mary one spring. A drought that made every prayer in the county sound thin with fear. But nothing came that they faced alone. That was the thing Eliza came to value most. Not that hardship spared them. That partnership never did. She and Rowan still rode to the creek when they could steal an hour. Still sat side by side and spoke plainly of what worried them. Still laughed more than either had expected two serious people could. Their love did not remain the bright ache of courtship. It deepened into something steadier and to Eliza's mind far more beautiful, familiar, tested, chosen again and again. One autumn evening many years later, after the children were grown enough to be doing chores of their own, and the ranch hummed with the noise of family instead of only ambition, Rowan found her on the porch at sunset. Wind moved through the grass. Smoke rose from the chimney. Thomas was in the yard showing Luke a new knot. Rose sat on the fence sketching the last gold of the day. Rowan lowered himself beside Eliza with the slow care of a man who had earned every ache in his bones. "Do you ever think about California?" he asked. She smiled a little. "Less now than I once did." "Do you regret not seeing it?" She turned to him. The lines in his face had deepened. A little silver had taken hold in his beard, yet those same gray eyes still looked at her as if she were the answer to something holy and private. "No," she said. "I do not regret the road I did not take. I only thank God for the one that threw me in front of a stampede." He laughed softly and reached for her hand. "That is a fearsome way to speak of Providence." It was a fearsome day. "The best one of my life," he said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Below them their children moved through the yard. Beyond them lay cattle, pasture, fences, water, labor, weather, the whole difficult beauty of the life they had built. It was not perfect. It never had been. But perfection had never been the promise. The promise had been this: a man, a woman, hard land, open truth, shared burdens, love that kept choosing to stay. When the sun slipped low and the first evening star came out, Rowan lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to the old ring that had once belonged to his mother. "I asked for a partner," he murmured. "The Lord sent me my whole heart." Eliza looked at the house, the children, the long grass shifting in the wind, then back at the man who had first held her against a racing horse while death thundered behind them. "No," she said softly. We were both answered. And there, with the ranch breathing around them and the prairie stretching endless beyond, Eliza understood at last that the truest rescues do not end when danger passes. Sometimes they begin there.